What's up, everybody? Logan Arliss here from Illinois Aviation Academy, coming to you live for our first webinar Wednesday event. Really excited to be bringing this to you guys. It's a way to keep you guys in the loop with what's going on here at the Academy, as well as within the industry. And we have a series of awesome guests lined up that you guys will get a chance to hear me talk to and learn from, and we'll have some fun while we do it. So, got a couple announcements to make. Had a really good week of flying last week. Got a lot of birds up. Two individuals made some big achievements. Miss Brittany Klosak and Zachary West, both accomplishing their first solo flights. So congratulations to them. Great job, guys. Keep up the good work. We have a statute that's currently in Congress, so we're going to be following this pretty close. This will be getting voted on by the House, and it's a vote to advise the Higher Education Act, which will provide oversight and certification for pilot vocational training at pilot schools that are certified in accordance with specific federal regulation. What this means is that you'll be able to use 539 funds, which is tax-free education funds, towards flight training, which would be a huge deal, and it's one step closer to getting other loans for our students, such as Sally Mae. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed on this. We'll keep you guys informed. Hopefully this gets signed. Parking. IA has expanded our parking, so we have two paved parking spots on the south side of our hangar. Really important. It's going to be great. As you know, the summer months can get pretty congested and our ramp begins to overflow. So when this happens, we have two beautiful parking spots now that we'll be able to utilize. And finally, we got a brand new sign up in the lobby, so make sure you check that out. It really brightens up our lobby, and definitely can't miss it on your way in. So getting into the meat of tonight, our first guest is Captain Ken Voelker. Really excited to be interviewing him tonight. He's really a man of aviation. He's had an extraordinary career that you guys are going to get to hear about. He's done it all, from flight instructing to charter, airline pilot, military pilot, and even worked as an air traffic controller. So it's going to be really exciting. If you guys have comments, questions that you would like me to ask Ken throughout the webinar, please comment below. I got my sidekick, Ben, next to me. He's going to be following on the Facebook page so that we can answer any questions that you guys have. So let me go ahead and get Ken on the line here. Hey, Ken.
Yeah, Logan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing this afternoon?
Just fine, just fine. Glad to see you.
Glad to see you as well. Thank you for joining us. I was just explaining to our viewers how extraordinary your career in aviation has been, and you know, you've really tasted all the flavors of aviation throughout your career, from being an instructor to a charter pilot, spending 23 years in the military, 35 years in the airlines, controlling traffic, and you're a big general aviation guy, having owned two light aircraft. So I'm excited to go through this journey with you and have you share some of your memories. And really, there's no better place to start than here near Clarksville, Indiana, just north of the Ohio River. So you grew up in Lanesville, Ohio, on a family farm. You had 6 siblings. So that's a pretty full household. What was it like growing up with such a full house?
Well, it was full, but it was a big farmhouse, and that was Lanesville, Indiana, where I grew up, and we had a big farmhouse. We had a farm. It was fine. I mean, we didn't. We had a few spats here and there. Who doesn't? You can have that with one sibling or 12. But we got along very well. We worked well together on the farm. And we played ball together and had enough for a basketball team, backyard basketball, and even some hitting some balls out in the pasture with baseball. So it was good. It was a good lifestyle. I had good parents, good family upbringing. So, and we learned early on the work ethic, which has proven to be a very excellent asset.
Absolutely, and that work ethic really took you far in your career, and we're going to see that through the interview here. So I know your father played a really important role in getting you started in aviation. So could you tell us a little bit about your dad and how he was able to spark that interest in aviation in you in such a young age?
Sure. And he was my definitely my mentor, and he's the one that gave me the spark. He was a civilian pilot. He started flying a J3 Cub that he bought with money he made working doing custom work with farm machinery. And that was a very young age for him. Then he went into the Army Air Corps and got in to the what was the earlier version of the Air Force, very near the end of World War II. So he flew all the training aircraft to get up to that point, and then was flying B-24 bombers during World War II. After that, he stayed in the reserves, Air Force Reserve, and flew various transports, C-46, 47, C-119s, and also had a couple of little airplanes on his own that from time to time that he would give us all the opportunity to go for a ride. And I latched onto that very young, and it was something I wanted to do, and he gave me the opportunity to do it. So we started out in the farm on across the highway from the house, little hay field there that where it was a cornfield, and we made a strip out of it, and that was my initial training in an Aranca Champ there on the farm.
That's extraordinary. So you had a airport right in your backyard. That's
Right.
amazing. So growing up, so you went to a Providence Catholic school in Clarksville, Indiana, and
Mhm.
you were a member of the basketball team, the intramurals, student council, National Honor Society member, and turned 16 years old. A couple days after, you're able to jump into an airplane, and you actually flew an airplane before you got your driver's license.
I did. I soloed. You had to be a little bit over 16 to get a driver's license, but now you can solo at 16. So there's the champ, not our champ, but very similar in a grass field. So yes, I did. I got my solo just before I could get a driver's license. Correct.
That's not a lot of people could say that they've done that. So you continued on. By the time you were a senior, by the time you graduated, you were a commercially rated pilot. You were instrument rated. And just a day after you graduated, you went ahead and got your certified flight instructor, your CFI certificate. And then you enlisted in the Kentucky Air National Guard, went to basic training for 6 months, and then immediately were called to active duty for another 2 years. So tell us a little bit about your decision to enlist at such a young age and what that was like for an 18-year-old kid.
Well, it was a change of lifestyle for sure. The method to my madness was to enlist. But the reason enlisting at a young age was the Vietnam War was going hot and heavy, and I didn't do it just to avoid the draft. I wanted to do my time, so to speak, and I wanted to do it around airplanes. Too young to go to flight school, but I was able to go to aircraft mechanic school, jet aircraft mechanic school. So I did that. I went to basic training and jet mechanic school. And as you said, we were activated at the same day I got off of active duty for training. We were on active duty for the 2-year stint during the Pueblo call-up. So again, the method to my madness was that I would do my military duty, get the initial schools out of the way, then be a weekend warrior, so to speak, while I was going to college to get a degree so that I could be ready for my big fat airline job at a younger age. Didn't work out exactly like that with a 2-year delay, but it did overall. And the active duty actually gave me a chance to see many places that I didn't know that I'd ever be able to see again around the world. And also to achieve the GI Bill benefits, the VA benefits to go to school on. So I couldn't have planned it any better myself. It just happened to work out.
It worked out. It did. So you got back from active duty, and your schooling kind of got put on hold, but you were able to pick that back up, and you decided to go to Indiana University and you studied business. Why'd you choose to go to Indiana, and why choose business?
Well, I lived in Indiana, and they had a good business school. But why did I choose business? Um, my goal, of course, was to be an airline pilot, and that eventually did work out. But I knew there were a lot of things that could get in the way for that, just as there are today. The economy, the supply and demand for pilots, maybe physical reasons. You might have something come up that you can't continue. So I knew I should have a backup, and business I thought was something that I could use as a platform in order to go many different avenues from that central point. And it very well worked out that way. So that was my plan.
Absolutely, always good to have a backup plan, especially in aviation. So you, after spending 2 years going through business school, you got a pretty unique chance and an opportunity at a flight slot with the Kentucky Air National Guard. And you have a pretty interesting story on how you were selected for that position. Could you share that a little bit with us?
Sure. It was unique to me then, and it still would be fairly unique. The time that I spent on active duty with the Guard as a mechanic, being on active duty and a flight crew chief, I was out there when the pilots would come out to fly. And the wing commander, the base commander and wing commander, had a son who was also at Richards Gabar in Kansas City. And I helped him out a little bit flying. I did some CFI work while I was on active duty. And so I helped him go toward his private license while we were working there on the jet. So got off active duty and go back home. And a couple of years later, I'd seen him several times since, but the boss said he wanted to see me. He had something he wanted to discuss with me. And that was, he had some pilot training slots that he wanted to fill. And he had lots of people knocking his door down to avoid the draft. But in his words, they didn't know an aileron from the VOR. So he knew I had the aptitude and the desire to go on and be a pilot. So he thought it would be a win-win, and it certainly was. So I thought about it for all of 10 to 15 seconds, told him, yeah, I'd like to do that. And off we went. Oh, I told him I didn't have a degree. He said, well, I know you've been going to school because we talk all the time when I'm flying your airplane. And he said, how many hours do you have of college? I told him 70. He said, well, in the Guard, we can commission you and send you to Air Force Flight School with 60 hours of training of college credit. I said, well, I guess we're in business. And we were. Off we went. We couldn't have planned it better if I had a plan. It just sort of fell into it.
Worked out great for you. So you got a flight slot on the RF 101, the Voodoo they called it. And so this was one of the aircraft that the Kentucky Air National Guard had here up in the top left corner there, which you would have been flying.
Yep.
And a little bit into your training, you had a pretty life-changing event kind of occur to you, and you actually had to eject out of this aircraft at about 500 feet. So tell us a little bit about how that event occurred and what your thought process was before, hitting that eject button.
Sure. It was a pretty life-changing event, at least for a little while. That morning, I had decided on the way to the airport at Bowman Field, I would have normally have gone to fly with students. It was a rainy day, low ceiling, and I thought, well, we're not going to do any flying over there, so I'll stop in at the Guard and see if they happen to have an open slot. I wasn't scheduled to fly. And sure enough, they did. So they said, yeah, if you want to fly, we'll put you in. So did the flight planning. We were going to do just IFR round robins. It was too low to fly low levels, the 500 feet low levels we normally flew. So taxied out and got ready to take off. And when I did start the takeoff roll, the rotation was normal, and I raised the nose up to about 20 degrees, I believe it was. This is a long time ago, in order to keep from trapping the nose gear, which folded forward into the wheel well because it accelerated so fast. This is a hot rod. So when I started to attempted to stop the pitch at that point, 20 degrees, it didn't stop there. The nose kept slowly raising up and forward, continuing to raise. least that's what the attitude indicators were saying. The performance instrument was takeoff. It's just not easy to fly a needle ball and airspeed and that kind of performance. But they agreed. So I couldn't get the nose down. I'm fighting it, and in the meantime, giving myself a horrible case of vertigo, spatial disorientation. When I couldn't get it, the nose to fall by pushing forward, I rolled to a 90-degree bank to knife edge it, trying to get the nose to fall. That didn't help. The roll, it rolled, but it didn't decrease pitch. So I thought, well, I checked the hydraulics. I still had hydraulic pressure. I really didn't know what the problem was. Many months later, I figured it out, and I'll get to that. But so I decided that I didn't have control of the airplane, whether it was flight controls, hydraulics. I didn't really know, but I knew that I couldn't fly the airplane. So I decided I'm going to have to get out of it. But I've tried to think initially, where's the airplane going to go? And had I been going the other direction, it would have been into subdivisions, nothing but houses. Excuse me. But to the south, the direction of my takeoff, there were open fields, some warehouses, railroad yard, and some ditches, some waterways. I thought, well, if it's going to happen, I'm lucky I'm going this way. So fought it a little bit longer. I said, I'm out of here. I said, okay, God, you got it. I'm leaving. And I pulled the ejection handle. So the judging or measuring from the tower audio tapes, my flight was 45 seconds long. They timed that from the time they heard the loud afterburners lighting, and the time that from the time of the 2430, the emergency locator beacon, when the canopy comes off the airplane. So that's how quick this flight was. I would have never dreamed that, because I had so many things running through my head. What are we going to do? But in training, you learn, if you can't, don't kill yourself to save an airplane if you're not able to do it. So I made that decision long before, and that's what we did. So after I got out of the airplane, through the clouds, I could see the orange glow of the airplane hitting the ground, exploding. Shortly after, I popped out of the clouds and started looking around and said, oh, gee, I'm right at the top of the trees here. So I did a few steering movements with the risers, and I was on the ground. It was that fast. Wow. So it's closer than I thought. So very lucky, very lucky.
Certainly made the right decision there. And I know at this time you would have had a young family at home. You had a 2-year-old daughter, a young wife. And did this ever raise any questions in your mind of, maybe this is something that I don't want to continue doing?
It did, very briefly. Initially, even that day, someone said, do you think are you going to keep flying? I said, well, sure. Absolutely. I'll get back in as soon as they let me. That was just, the young kid coming out and saying, of course I will. But I meant it. But then as I was healing up from the soreness from the ejection, with nothing else to do, certainly I had some thoughts about, is this really the right thing to do with a young family and young wife? But I made up my mind that what else am I going to do? I tried a few other things that when flying was slow, and I wasn't very good at them. So I said, this is the fire in my belly that tells me I'm going to be a pilot. So I said, let's go. What we did.
Absolutely. So you got right back in the saddle, and eventually got back on the Kentucky Air National Guard, continued your military career. They ended up upgrading the 101s to the F4s. Tell us a little bit about the upgrades that they put onto this airplane, and some of the differences, between flying the 101 and the F4.
Sure. Both great airplanes. It was just on a different timeline, different era almost. The 101 was designed and built in the mid-50s, 1950s. The instrumentation was very rudimentary for that, not for that time, but when it was built. And it was part of the reason with the attitude indicators, by the way, I never had a flag on those attitude indicators, but surmised that may have been the primary problem with the airplane. But moving up to the F4, it was much more ready for the mission of reconnaissance. That's what we flew them for. They were fighters. You could also, do bombing and have missiles and that sort of thing. But our mission was strictly reconnaissance. So the sensors, the cameras were far better, much better night capability, much better instrument or bad weather capability. The performance, the 101 was fast. It would out drag race an F4 pretty quickly, but the F4 had a higher top end. It was a Mach 2 airplane. Not that we flew them that very often, but it was faster, bigger engines, and again, much better electronics and navigation equipment to do the mission. So, and it also would turn much better. The 101 had a rather short and thin wing on it, so it would go fast straight ahead. You can see the sleekness of it. They're very aerodynamically clean. For the F4, was had wings bent upward and tail bent downward. I always said it was so ugly. It was beautiful, but it sure did fly well, and it had again, better instrumentations and an inertial navigation system. So an upgrade in time, like technology always does.
Oh yeah, and it looks like it was a blast to fly. And you continued on, so you went through, had a very decorated career in the Air Force, and you got to fly with one of your childhood friends, who was also on the Kentucky Air National Guard with you here.
Yeah.
And actually, I just wanted to mention, so you are in the lead on this F4 here. So this is an actual photo of you and your crew, and you're leading the pack there.
Right. That's right. We were on our way to Germany.
Yeah.
They had a special tail detail painted on there for this deployment. We were deploying to Zweibrücken, Germany. Each unit had a designated base, usually in Europe, where we would be tasked to go if the big ball dropped, so to speak, and there was a war instantaneously caused by any reason, where it would require large commitment. Well, our time at that base, our base at that time was in Germany. So we would go over to that area and fly in that region to become familiar with it, should we have to go in unusual circumstances. Well, that's what this was all about. It was a test, not really a test per se, but an orientation for us to get familiar with that area. So we deployed over with several air refuelings on the way. We bedded the airplanes down and started flying almost immediately the next day after crew rest, and planned the missions, went out and acquired, had really good target acquisition. The photo processors did a good job. The intel guys did good job of reading what was on the pictures and then sending that intel up the ladder to the people who had requested it. So we worked hard. We didn't have a lot of time off, but we accomplished what we went over for and did it safely, and then redeployed home a couple of weeks later.
Absolutely. And so you always held yourself to a very high standard academically and really in everything that you did. As we see this here, you were scoring perfect test scores on your stand evaluation tests. And explain to me so I'm not a military guy, but what does the stand evaluation test consist of? Is that similar to like a check ride for a civilian?
It's yes, but it's not just one crew member, it's the whole unit. The stand eval means standardization and evaluation. You had a stand eval section in your unit, but then you were graded in an inspection semi-annually usually, or biannually, I'm sorry. The team would come in from the Air Force, camp out with you for usually a week, and they're flying with various air crews, giving them check rides on the actual mission. Excuse me again. And then you'd have a lot of written tests. They would test you on the threats that you might find in a wartime condition, performance of the airplane, And then again, the check rides themselves where you're out flying.
And so this is probably my favorite picture of you. I mean, this is, for lack of a better term, this is a badass picture. So you're strapped into your F4 here, right before takeoff on, this was that deployment you were talking about to Germany.
Right.
So that's awesome. Front cover page of the Phantom Eye. And so you spent quite a few years in the military, in the Kentucky Air National Guard, and flying the F4, flying C-130s. At this time, you're also instructing, and you became the chief pilot of a charter company, flying 421s, 404s, 310s. And then you decide to go and kind of switch routes a little bit, and you became an air traffic controller at Lexington Airport. So in 1976, they would add their brand new terminal building, which we see here on the left. And that terminal building was probably the fullest it's ever been in 1978 when the Wildcats beat Notre Dame in the basketball finals, and they were awaiting their return. But why make that decision? You know, you're a pilot, you're doing what you love to do, flying F4s and a chief pilot of a charter company. Why decide that I want to work on the other side of the radio now and do a little air traffic controlling?
Great question, Logan. And my dad asked me the same thing. He said, well, you thought I was nuts, because he was an air traffic controller as well for part of his career, or most of his career. The reason was that I was still flying Phantoms. When I went to air traffic control, I didn't stop. I didn't get out of the guard. So I was still had my fast pants on. I just stopped flying the air taxi because I couldn't really make a living at that time doing it. It was even as chief pilot. I was making a living, but not a very good living, and I had really no aspiration above that, or no clear path to anything better in that area. And I wanted to stay in that area so that I could still fly in the Guard. Again, my mission, personal goal, was to be an airline pilot. At that time, there was no airline hiring anyone, and also at that time, if you didn't get hired by age 30, or at the very worst, latest 31, they wouldn't even answer your the telephone or the interviews or the applications. So I was getting a little concerned that I might get to be that ripe old age of 30 and still not have a job, with no route to get the job. So air traffic control was a sidestep to have a backup again in case I never got the opportunity to move on. And it worked out pretty well. It wasn't flying, but I was still flying in the Guard, so I kept that up. And it was very interesting. It was very challenging and very interesting. I could have done it as a career, but frankly, I'm glad I didn't have to.
Absolutely. Yeah, you did end up making it to the airline. So after spending a couple years controlling traffic, you were hired on by United. That then brought you up to Chicago. But then a couple years later, you wound up back up in a control tower at DuPage Airport, no other than our lovely DuPage, where I'm sitting currently. And you're controlling traffic again.
Yeah.
Now, DuPage definitely looked a lot different back then. We didn't have the flight center, and looks like the runways were a little different. But why are you back now controlling traffic once you got your job at United?
Well, much like today, when the economy goes up and down, and we've had a real quick downer here this time, and I certainly hope that it starts to open up pretty soon so that it doesn't get too bad. But there will be furloughs again now, and that's what happened to me. The economy took a downslide, and I was furloughed. I was laid off from United. Of course, there were very few other flying jobs open, because when one aspect of aviation takes a dive, usually the others go with it to an equal or sometimes greater extent. So I was able to still stay in the Guard, but that was in Kentucky, and I still needed to work. I needed a job. So at this particular time, it was soon after the air traffic controllers were fired because they pulled an illegal strike, and they replaced pretty much all of them that went on strike. Now, I didn't cross any picket lines. I wouldn't have done that. But once that was over, they needed a lot of controllers. So I had the opportunity. I could have gone back down to the southern region, back to Kentucky, or stay in the Chicago area. And I was offered O'Hare, Midway, Aurora, DuPage, and good old Meigs Tire, which is unfortunately not there anymore. But Aurora, DuPage stuck out because it was a good commute for me. It was easy to get there from where I live. I liked the people there. I went and actually interviewed, or not interviewed, but they checked me out, and I checked them out, these different facilities. And that's the one that made the most sense to me, since I didn't really plan to stay in that career forever. I thought I could check out quicker there and be of help to them much quicker than if I'd gone somewhere like O'Hare, and I'm sure that was the case. So I enjoyed my 2 years there. It was challenging. We had a lot of operations there, many days more per hour than O'Hare ran, because there was a lot of flights going on. So that's what brought me to good old DuPage.
Well, we're glad that you did make it up here, and I'm sure, yeah, you would have had your hands full, because in the 80s, that's when DuPage really took off with traffic. Midway would have been landlocked, and everyone was moving over, and general aviation was really taking off at that time. So I'm sure you were doing a lot of dancing up in that control tower there at DuPage.
It was a dance. As you can see, what we had for runways then was 22, 422, 1533, 1028, and we had a grass strip parallel between the parallel taxiway and the actual runway. There was a grass strip in there. So we were running 4 runways there, and the dance was to intermingle to the cross flow of the traffic, and we could split it if we had to. I remember getting over 200 operations per hour there sometimes. We could split it at 2 local controllers, but typically it was just one controller and a ground controller operating the airport. It was a dance. Yeah, I loved it.
Yep. And we had a question come in.
Okay.
Growing up on the Ohio River, did you do much fishing down there?
I did some fishing, but not in the river. Well, I did fish in the river some, but it was more in the farm ponds. They were a lot cleaner than the Ohio River. I did a little water skiing in the Ohio River, and drank some of that dirty water and didn't care for much for it. But actually, I was too busy working on my going toward my airline job to do much fishing or boating. Did a little, but not a lot. Good question. Plenty of it available.
Absolutely. And so after controlling traffic at DuPage for a couple of years, you picked right back up where you left off at United, and ended up making a long career at United. You lasted 35 years when you were forced to retire at the mandatory age of 65. And would you have kept flying longer if you could have?
I probably would have. The rule changed. It had been age 60 for many years, mandatory retirement. And that was I'm sorry that my wife will get that. That was too young. That was too young to retire. And I wasn't ready then. 65, it wasn't a bad time. I would have probably gone a few more years had we had the opportunity, but I was having a good time. I was flying a 777 on mostly in long haul international routes, good places to go, good trips. And I was fairly senior, so I could choose my time off and where I wanted to go and that sort of thing. If I might, I'd like to, this one picture you have here with my buddy, that's in front of a 727, but you might think it's funny that I can be standing in front of the engine. Well, that's on a balcony. That's at the Museum of Science and Industry. So the engines are not that close to the ground, but I volunteered there, and that was I was checking this guy out to be a tour guide there with me at the museum. So not to sidestep your questions, I'm sorry, but I wanted to point that out.
No, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And initially starting out, you're trying to choose an airline to go to. Why pick United over the other ones that were available?
Another good question. And the real answer is because they were hiring. For many years, religiously, I would update my applications with American, Eastern, Delta, Piedmont, and Allegheny. Those were the 5 airlines that flew and from the area that I was familiar with them. United, I didn't really know much about United, frankly. But I'd see them when I was flying air taxi or charters up in places like Fort Wayne and South Bend and into Michigan, the Great Lakes area. The 737s was all I would ever see. Occasionally a 727. I'm not sure I even knew they had 747s. I probably did, but basically they were the ones that started hiring. So I sent in my application when I heard they were going to be hiring, and within 2 weeks I had a letter back giving me not a class date, but an interview date. Came to Chicago for an interview. That was a 3-day process. And I went to Denver for a couple of days flying the sims. And within a month from my application, I had a class date, which was totally unheard of. But that's how fast things were starting to build at that time.
Yep. So coming out off of a military background, being in the military for so long, transitioning into the airlines now, how was that transition for you?
It was fine. I mean, there are different types of operations in the military. Let's start with the airplanes. They're totally different kinds of airplanes. Both of them, the maintenance was excellent on them. They were very well designed to do the missions that were designed for. The military typically would not have quite as many backup systems or backup things as the airliners because of the nature of the mission. Training was very, I shouldn't say intense, but I wouldn't be wrong using that. It was high priority. You didn't have much time off. It was the fire hose concept. You drank out of the fire hose and then took the tests and hopefully passed them. Simulators, the airline simulators were actually, of course, it was later than when I was going through the initial military training, but the simulators in the airlines were a little bit better, considerably better, with full motion and all of that. So much that when you go to school with the airline, you never fly the airplane. You get your ratings in the simulator. First time you're in the airplane is with a load of people. Now you'll have a line check airman flying with you, which I did that for 8 years also. But it's the training is rather intense in both of them, but very successful. In the military, they own you pretty much. They can tell you where you're going to go and what you're going to fly and all of that. The airlines, similar to an extent, but you're a civilian, so they treat you a little more like humans there. Not that it was inhuman, but in military, but different lifestyle, let's put it that way. You're a little more control of your life in the civilian side.
Yeah, so you spent quite a good time at United and flew just about everything that they had to offer. And since then, you're still involved in general aviation, so you still get to fly. You are a big service member for the community, so you do a lot of volunteer work. You did a lot of Young Eagles flights, which is very generous of you. And so how much flying do you get to do now that you're retired?
Well, not near as much as I should and that I'd like to. I've gotten a little bit bogged down with my volunteer work, but I'm going to change that here shortly. And when things open up a bit more, I'd like to take some short trips, go down and visit some museums, just out and backs, and just utilize the airplane and get a little more back in the current. Current, but not the way you want to be current, if you know what I mean. I'd like to go out and fly around a lot more. So that's something I've been negligent on because of let some other people tell me what I should be doing. Yes. But
we hope that you get back to it here shortly. And so you've owned 2 aircraft throughout your lifetime, and one was a Decathlon there on the left of the screen, and the other one is our beloved 41 Delta here at DuPage that has helped many pilots achieve their goals and their dreams in aviation. And with these aircraft, you got to give back to your son a little bit and share some of the experiences that you and your father had. So you got him through his solo and his decathlon, and then he got his private and instrument rating in 4-1 Delta there. So that have been pretty rewarding, sharing those experiences with your son as well.
It was. It was rewarding. And he, from that point on, didn't really he considered it, but he didn't take it any further than that. He didn't do the commercial. He may at some point. I hope he does. But I didn't want him to think that I expected him to do the same path that I took. I gave him the opportunity. He's a very good pilot, and he could step in at any time and continue that training if that was something he wanted to pursue. But so I told him and tell everyone when I'm working with kids, you've got to have the fire in your belly is the way I describe it to do it. It's not something that's all that easy. I mean, almost anyone could do it given the time. But if you don't have that intense desire to do it, it's too hard. It takes too long, and you never get finished going to school. So it's something that if you don't thrive on that kind of continuous training and retraining, it's not for everybody. That's all I can say. But Matt is he's a good pilot, and he could go on with it if he decides to do that.
That's definitely true there. And got a couple of fun questions for you. So on this slide, I fit just about as many aircraft I could that you've operated throughout your career, even from the 152, the 172, 82. You flew the Apache, the Aztec, the 404, the 310, the 421. Your military aircraft there in the middle, the C-130, the F-4, the F-101. Did some time in the DC-8, DC-10, the 727, 37, 57, 67, and the 777. So out of all these aircraft, my question to you is which ones, hold a special spot in your heart?
Oh, man. Well, as they would say in the airlines, if someone asks you which is your favorite airplane, you would normally say the one I'm flying now, because that's the one you're most intimately up on, and you know all the numbers and the facts. And I would still say that, but I'm not flying any of them now. But the last one I flew was by far the best airliner, the 777, down there in the lower right corner. Just beautifully, the flight control harmony. It's fly by wire, and it just was so easy to be smooth. Anybody could be a better pilot in that airplane than they could in a lot of other ones, because it knew how it wanted to be handled. And it was easy to do it that way. I love that airplane. The other one on the other end of the spectrum is the 727. I like that just for opposite reason, totally opposite. Is that was a total pilot's airplane. It had no computers on it. The only automation was an autopilot that it was okay at cruise, and you could climb and descend with it. It did have an ILS coupler, but it just wasn't married to the systems of the airplane as smoothly as time went on and the technology improved. So I like those for different reasons. The old 7.2 it didn't do anything you asked it to. It was fast. It was noisy, and anybody that flew that can't hear it now because of the noise, the air noise, that bad for your ears. But those are my two favorite airliners. Militarily, they were all great. I loved the 101 because of its acceleration and maneuverability. It wasn't all that good. F4 was. C-130, totally different type of airplane, but very, very versatile. It could do things that you can't do in the fighters. So I enjoyed every one of them. For civilian airplanes, just for fun, that decathlon was a hoot. It was fully aerobatic. I did a lot of that with it. Matt could do aerobatics about as well as I could in it. It was just fun to just go out and kick the tires and walk around it and go have fun. So I never flew an airplane I didn't like, but each type of airplane has its own things to love about them.
Sure, they sure do. I'm sure you had to bust the old whiz wheel out a few times while you're flying that 727.
You do. There's nothing there to tell you, well, it's time to descend and pull the throttles back for you. You had to figure that out all on your own, which was, and that's that's why it was fun, because you were more accomplished in doing actually the pilot type of stuff.
Hmm. So out of you got to travel a lot throughout your career, and you've been every state in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Central America, South America, Europe, Asia. So you really got to cover a good portion of the world. Which routes were your favorite? What locations were your favorite to go visit?
In the 777, which I flew, was fortunate, very fortunate to fly for my last 12 years, I believe it was. I got fairly senior, so I could choose pretty much where and when I wanted to go for when the flights were operating, that is. So I did all of those places you were talking about. South America, I didn't care for quite as much as Europe. Asia, I went to China an awful lot, and Tokyo. But the reason for going there were more a matter of being a lot of flight time for the number of hours or days spent. I could go to China and back in 3 days and have 26 to 28 hours of flight time. Well, that means more time off to do other things. But they were, and I wasn't really in love with the layovers there. I mean, there were places to go and see all the highlights, the touristy things. Places I really enjoyed the layover and the actual trip itself was Germany, Frankfurt, but more Munich, mostly Munich, and then Hawaii on the other, going the other direction. Flew into Honolulu mostly, but occasionally into Maui and Kona as well with the 777. So those were just more, more enjoyable layovers, I'll say.
Absolutely. How about the most challenging airports that you've been into throughout your career?
I would say Washington National is right up there with the which is now the Reagan National, I believe they call it, the downtown airport, where because the restricted airspace there with the mall and the White House and all the government buildings, you had to follow the river very precisely into land to the south, and you were in a final turn all the way up to almost touchdown. So that was very sporty, and challenge is what pilots like. I mean, you want to do it well, but that was pretty challenging. And then taking off, flying the other direction, you had to stay over the river the same way going back out. Don Wayne Airport in California, just outside of LA, had a departure procedure because there were a lot of really rich people living around there. They liked having the airport close to them so they didn't have to go to LA, but they also didn't like the noise. So they had noise monitors right off the end of the runway. So you'd do a max performance takeoff, climb at best angle for a short time, and then level off and pull the power back so you could coast over the noise monitors, and then so you didn't make the people mad. That was a little weird. San Diego, you had to fly down the hill with a parking garage sticking up in the middle, right about the just above minimums on an approach. So that was a little sporty. What else? Those are the ones that stick out in my mind. There's a couple of real short airports up in New York and White Plains, and then over in where Yale is. Yale University was, I think, the shortest runway that we had on the system. And I seem to always get those in the 737, get those trips in the winter where there's snow and ice on the runways too. So those got a little sport times too.
That wouldn't help, that's for sure. So I've been into White Plains once, flying. Yeah, I was actually flying Ted Nugent up there. So I flew him up into White Plains, but I was in a Pilatus, so I didn't have any problems with the runway length like you would have had.
Oh, that's a great airplane though. I'd love to get a hold of that. That's interesting. Yeah, but that's a good airport for but that airplane you can get in and out of anywhere. That's beauty.
Yeah, it is. It's a very versatile airplane, and I also got a chance to do the Washington River approach that you were talking about when I was going through my type rating at flight safety. So that had to have been a hoot to fly that in real life. That's for sure.
It was. Thanks.
So my last question for you, if we don't have any more here on Facebook, but a lot of the viewers tonight are young pilots, people, just getting into aviation, planning to make a career out of it. So coming from someone like you with so much experience in so many different avenues, what bits of advice would you give someone who's just starting out their aviation career?
Well, there are two or three things. First, if you know you want to be a pilot, you have to again have the intense desire and stick with it. You got to work hard, study hard, do it as quickly as you can. I mean, not to get it over with, but make your training as condensed. Don't try not to do it, once every 2 weeks, because there's too many hours making up for just going back and reviewing. And also to kind of choose the kind of flying you think you'd like to do, as I did. And I didn't know that I was going to do all these types of flying. There's general aviation, which goes right up to like what you're doing in corporate and air taxi with great equipment. That's a good way, a good use of flying. The military, it's totally different. It tends to be a little more risky, but there's again, some of that, the challenges of that you take the measured risks are what makes it kind of fun at times. So, but it's a different lifestyle. All three of those are different lifestyles. The airlines, great equipment, diverse routes, lots of different types of equipment. You don't have ultimately as much control over your life as you might with any of these. You don't. In the airlines, as you become more senior, though, you do get a little more control of when and what you want to do with that career. Another thing I would say is don't just go out for the money. Do what you want, not just for flying, but for anything. When you wake up in the morning, you shouldn't have to say, "Oh, darn, I got to go to work again today." It's, "Oh, today here we're going to go to White Plains, and we get to go to Hawaii, or we get to go fly some low levels at 500 feet and 500 knots." Do what makes your clock tick, and try to figure that out early so that you're driving your training toward that end. Then the other thing I would say is that, as I mentioned before, you asked me why I went to air traffic control and that sort of thing, is to have a backup. So when you're taking your training, regardless of where you're doing it, I mean, you could do it at IAA, a great academy there, and be going to school somewhere else, or have the program that you guys have attached to a university, so that you can have your degree and something else that you can do if for some reason the flying doesn't work out, because it doesn't always happen, but there are a lot of roller coaster rides in aviation. So if you can prepare yourself in a way that you can get yourself through those downtimes, and heaven forbid, if you can't pursue aviation, you'll have something else that you can live on.
Absolutely. So great bits of advice there. Thank you for that. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share some of these stories with us. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. You're a true aviation American hero, and someone that I truly look up to as a young man in aviation. So thank you so much. Thanks for being on.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I love working with Bob and you and all the great folks out there at DuPage and IAA, and I hope I can get out there and spend some more time with you. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to shout out on the things that have been a great, lucky and very safe and rewarding career for me. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Ken. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay, you too. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
So long.
All right, guys. So that is it for tonight. Thanks to Ken Voelker for coming on the show. Great guy. Stay tuned next week, 5/27 Wednesday night. We'll be speaking with Timothy Gentz of Air Wisconsin. He's actually the director of pilot recruitment and aviation employment. So stay tuned, guys. Have a nice night. Thanks for joining.